Meeting, like, in the committee.
You're live.
All right, we are live. Senate Education Committee back in business for 2026. Today, I thought it would make sense for us just to do a kind of a comprehensive overview, walkthrough, whichever you want to call it, of Act 73 as passed, to get our heads back in it. And with within that, a particular focus on what parts are law no matter what, and what parts are contingent on what happening. And then I think we're having a joint hearing with the House, walking through the board of the redistricting task force on Thursday. And other people will be filling in, and we have I think the V's coming in on Friday, and we'll be filling in the out weeks, but we'll talk some time today, by the way, at the end of the day, about priorities, so that we can all sort of chime in. We're gonna have to feel our way along and figure out the approach that we want to take on Act 73. But today we want to start just with getting our heads back in it. And we have I think SM James and Ezra over there today for the two parts. Oh, and John is joining. And I think you get there at 2:15 there, right? Yeah. Okay. So you got to kill 45 minutes.
Oh, great.
Okay. So that's fine if we take a break. So we all have fresh copies. We're also we have a lot of reports that came in beyond Act 73, some of which were from Act 73, I think, and otherwise, but we're gonna, over the course of the next couple of weeks, also just make sure that we're gonna get reports, one of these touch base and make sure that deal with them. So yes, we should spend that on as well. So, but let's start with this, and then we can, after we're through with this, like I said, we can have a committee discussion about priorities and approaches. With that, you are on.
Great. Beth St. James, Office of Legislative Counsel. Hello again. Apologies for the voice. I'm brought some 2025 with me into 2026.
Yes.
So elementary school germs. Javni, can you let me into the Zoom so I can share my screen?
Oh, yes.
Okay. So, couple things. One, I think I sent Daphne, and if I didn't, I will send it. I made a list of all of the reports that are due to your committee and with hyperlinks to all of them. So we don't have that. Do you have that? Okay. So if I was able to find the report myself, I linked to it. And if I could not find the report, there is no link to it. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means that I was unable to access it. And then for today, what I've done is I've prepared, and you all have the slides in front of you. I can share. You can be sharing.
Just one.
Yep.
All right.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay. So just some PowerPoint slides with very high level summaries of all of the sections that I was responsible for, which are essentially sections 1 through 33, which I've been calling the education policy section since I'm your education policy attorney. Excuse me, that's gonna go real long. I'm here for whatever you guys need. So if you don't want to go into detail on a specific section, let's just move on. And if you want to go into more detail than I am inclined to, please let me know and we'll dive into that detail. Not every word of Act 73 is in these PowerPoint slides. Some of it is verbatim. Some of it is my own summary to try and fit words into a slide. For every question that you have specific to language, I'm always going to refer you to the act itself and what it says. So, so we're gonna talk about sections 1 through 33. And I've put page numbers on here, so you can jump right in your bill to the applicable pages. So I did not put anything in detail related to the findings on the slides, because I think they kind of speak for themselves. And let me pull up Act 73. Is there anything in the finding that you want to go over in detail? I'm kind of helping you what I think you should go over. I'm skipping through all of the nice things about Brigham. And I'm coming to page 2, subsection B on intent plan language. Do you think you have that, or do you want to walk through it quickly? Like, are you, I'm in section 1.
I don't think, no, I don't think we do.
Okay. So this is where all of your plans for this year live, just FYI. Okay, we're moving on. See, I told you. So section 2 of the bill was the Commission on the Future of Public Education changes. It refocused the charge of the commission. And they were required to come back to you all, and I have linked right here. Anything that you see underlined is a hot link to the report. So they're supposed to come back to you all with recommendations for what roles, functions, or decisions should be a function of local control, and what roles, functions, or decisions should be a function of control at the state level. Necessary updates to the roles and responsibilities of the school board versus the electorate. Process for a community served by a school to have a voice in decisions regarding school closures. And then a process for monitoring and implementation of Act 73. There, recommend you can find section 2 and pages 6 through 18 of the Act. And then again, this is a link directly to the final findings and recommendations of the commission.
Do you have the commission coming in as well for?
We don't have them yet, but Jane, I just talked about that. We will have them in.
Of process washes.
Within the next, go ahead.
So 16 VSA, now that Act 73 is law.
Yep.
Have all the changes been made to that?
Any change that was to be effective any day prior to January 6, 2026 are in effect. But there's lots of things that have effective dates after today. And we'll hit those every time we come to one of them. The intent section and section 2 are current law. They've already taken it. Okay, so section 3. Again, I didn't put a lot of detail on this slide because I think the language, the charge of the school district redistricting task force, section 3, speaks for itself. And so if you'd like to go to the act itself and look at any of the language related to the redistricting task force, we can do that. Otherwise, just know that section 3 was the creation of the school district redistricting task force. And again, I've linked to the final report here. Was that enough detail on that section?
Yes, I think we probably all remember this section, and we have the report with the appendixes coming. Lesson, like I said, would be on Thursday. Go through it. So
Okay.
So is that a hyperlink? Okay, so
It's a hyperlink to the report itself.
Yeah.
And then the report itself has appendices, please.
and you have to report that file. Well, yeah.
Section 4, which you could find on pages 24 through 27 of Act 73, is the creation of the school district voting board working group. This is a live body. My understanding is that they stand ready. So the voting board working group is supposed to create voting district boards or recommendations to you all within new school districts to ensure board membership is apportioned in a constitutional manner. They're also supposed to recommend to you guys school board size. That work can't be done unless you have school district boundaries. So my understanding is that this group, they've met a couple times already, and that they stand ready to pick up work if and when the legislature calls upon them to do that, or if and when there is anything you are working on that they see, something that they can work on. I will just note, section 4 required the working group to recommend to you all school board size. Recommendations for school board size, like how many members on a school board for new consolidated school districts. I know that you don't have new consolidated school districts today. But there is no date, there's no deliverable date tied to this recommendation. So if and when you find yourselves in a position where you think a recommendation regarding school board size would be helpful to your work, someone's gonna have to reach out to this working group to get that recommendation.
Yes.
So I apologize, I may have distracted when you started the review of section 4. Did they meet at all? Did they? Okay.
Yep.
Any outcome worthy of sharing? Was no report?
They have not been, their work to you was conditioned on there being new school district boundaries that they could do that work within. But I do believe they met at least twice, including meeting with the Agency of Digital Services, Vermont Center of Geographic Information, looking at the mapping tools so that they are ready if and when you call upon them.
Okay. Thank you.
Section 6. You'll notice there's no section 5 in the slides. Section 5 was a small piece of intent language. I have left it out of the PowerPoint presentation, which is not really a presentation, more of a summary on PowerPoint slides. Section 6 is class size minimums. So you can find that on pages 27 through 31. This change does not take effect until July 1, 2026. So they are not legally in effect for this school year. The class size minimums were added to section 165 of Title 16, the Education Quality Standards Statute. I've listed what all of those minimums are here. There's a multi-age classroom limit here. If I get rid of this, oh no, I don't want that. I don't want that. And then there are a whole host of types of courses or grades that class size minimums don't apply to that I've already listed. I've also listed. The state board may grant a waiver to a school, meaning they don't have to follow class size minimums, or maybe they follow them in their own special way. If the school is geographically isolated or is working on a compliance plan. And if the school is not meeting class size minimums over 3 consecutive years, the secretary may take actions that the secretary is allowed to take when the school is not following the EQS in general, which requires 2 years of technical assistance first. So class size minimums don't take effect until July 1, 2026. The secretary doesn't take any action until there has not been compliance over 3 consecutive years. So we're already in 2029. And then let's say that the secretary finds that a school is not meeting the class size minimum requirement. The secretary is first required to offer 2 years of technical assistance first. So that puts us into 2031. Before, under the law as written today, there could be any action taken by the state board for failure to meet class size.
Can I ask a question? So particularly as we look at grades 9 through 12, I think an interesting wrinkle came up in our travels around the state, where it appeared that if they couldn't meet a certain minimum, they would start sending the students into dual enrollment, sending them to a local college to take that class, cancel the AP class, and instead move them to a college. I feel like that's a perverse potential outcome of high school class size minimums, is taking the money out of the K through 12 system and moving it to Dartmouth or UVM. I just want to raise that, and I don't think we've done enough to acknowledge that that's something that seems to be happening already when they can't meet their class size minimums.
I will just note that advanced placement courses and terminal courses are exempt from class size minimum requirements.
So maybe what we do is say, try to keep them in-house, like try not to be sending students to dual enrollment if you're canceling an AP class.
Well, I get this money part, whatever, we can have a discussion about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's inequitable
Policy.
to say, oh, drive to Dartmouth instead of offer an AP class on campus. That doesn't meet everyone's needs.
So section 7 was a piece of session law that similarly would take effect July 1, 2026, along with the class size minimums. Failure to comply with education quality standards. So this first bullet point here is basically a summary of what happens if a school is not meeting education quality standards, which is where the class size minimums live. So the secretary is required to provide written notice and offer technical assistance for 2 years if a school is not, if there may be insufficient progress towards student performance or they're not meeting EQS. And then after those 2 years of technical assistance and the school has still not committed to compliance, the secretary is required to make recommendations to the State Board of Education on next steps. Under current law, included in those next steps is the option of consolidation, school consolidation, so rearranging of supervisory unions, etc. What section 7 of Act 73 does is it says, if the state board is required to take action because a school is not compliant with class size minimums, the option of consolidation is taken off the table if that consolidation would trigger school construction costs in excess of a capital reserve account, right? Money that the school has already put aside or the district has already put aside for such a project. Until you all establish new school district boundaries and take further action regarding the consequences for failure to meet EQS. My understanding is that section 7 here is really meant to say, if a school is not meeting class size minimums, and you're like, well, let's just put a bunch of schools together, but you can't do that because there's not space for the kids. So you would then force the building of a new school or adding a wing. But then those districts would be required to take on debt to do that. That's off the table until you figure some things out.
Yes, sir. Let's,
So what if the school district decided to put schools in?
The school district can do whatever they want on their own. This would be a forced action by the state board.
And is that, EQS, failure to meet EQS? When does that go into effect? So when did the clock start?
So this is current law as far as this first bullet point here is describing current law. And the class size minimums, because they live in the EQS statute, this current law will apply to them when they go into effect on July 1, 2026, which is why this piece of session law was added to say, okay, any other EQS, if you're just looking at class size minimums, consolidation is off the table if it's going to generate construction costs because we don't have a construction program that can help with that. So again, extrapolating everything out, class size minimums don't go into effect until July 1, 2026. There's a 3-year window in which the school would have to demonstrate compliance, and if they don't, then the secretary may take action, and that action requires 2 years of technical assistance. So we're looking at the very earliest, 2031, before the secretary could even make any recommendations to the state board for consequences for not complying with the class size. And it's not even contemplating the waiver process that the state board is required to undergo. And any determination of geographical necessity, et cetera.
the secretary isn't required to take any action.
Correct.
May, so, and, okay,
Correct.
secretary, so all kinds of, okay, yeah.
Okay, so section 8, this is a piece of session law. In pages 32 and 33 of the act. It required the State Board of Education to update their education quality standards rules to reflect the new class size minimums. And they have to initiate that rulemaking on or before August 1st, 2026. And then also to update the education quality standards with statewide graduation requirements that would begin in the 27-28 school year for the graduating class of 2031. And they do not need to initiate that rulemaking until on or before July 1, 2027. Section 8 also requires the State Board of Education to initiate rulemaking on or before August 1st, 2026 to update the independent school program approval rules, again, to make sure that the class size minimum compliance piece is in there. And then it also requires a report back to you all on or before December 1st, 2025, with proposed standards for what it means to be a school deemed small by necessity or sparse by necessity.
I got a question, but I want to step back to section 7 real quick. Just for some clarification. You know, the secretary is required to provide technical assistance, and after 2 years, what if, and of course, what if it's dead, but once this happens, say, I'll take Ripton School as a poster child because they realized at that point they didn't have enough students to keep that school going. So are they required to they have to stay open for 2 years, or can the school and the secretary decide, or the school district decide to do stuff sooner?
Yes, there's nothing in section 165 that prohibits a school district from taking any of the actions they're legally allowed to take.
Okay.
So if Ripton's articles of agreement allow them to take certain action, section 165 related to the maintenance of schools, section 165, the education quality standards, and any action the secretary is going to take doesn't necessarily prevent them from doing that.
And somebody could come along and go, hey, it says here you should be able to go 2 years. But as long as the supervisory or the district decides, this really doesn't matter.
This Section 7 is about recommendations from the Secretary of Education and forced action by the State Board of Education. It's not about the independent decision-making authority of school boards. Now, I don't work in the field. All of these things are related, right? So it's easy for me to sit here and say that, and then someone in the field is saying, but that's not actually how it works in real life, right? I just want to acknowledge that.
Mhm.
But in the black and white reading of the law, this is about the Secretary's recommendations and state board action. Okay. Just went over section 8, section 9. This is where you're going to get a bunch of reports back from the Agency of Education. Okay, so section 9 requires AOE to recommend to the State Board of Education on or before January 1 of 2026 statewide graduation standards. It requires AOE to on or before January 15th, 2027 develop and publish a statewide school calendar that would be in effect for the 28-29 school year. And Aaron on there. And then the section, and which has been referred to as the section 9 report, is the rest of the slide. So it requires AOE to report to you all on or before December 1st of 2025 on several different categories of information. So the first one was on proposed implementation plan for statewide financial data and student information systems, recommendations for a school construction division within AOE, progress report or guidance that would be provided to the field regarding the business processes and transactions that would need to occur to facilitate school district mergers, and then recommendations for the need for cooperative education services and the oversight of therapeutic schools. I believe you have all of these. The legislature has received all of these reports. Section 10 requires, the State Board of Education to review each rule series that it is responsible for. So they're responsible for over a dozen rules. And I think you've heard testimony over the years that some of them are quite outdated. And the rulemaking is a very intensive process. So this section is asking the state board to do a review of all of your rule series and then come back to us in December of 2026 with a recommendation for rules that the state board thinks are no longer necessary. So what can we sunset? And then a plan for updating all of the rules that need to be updated, the order in which they plan to do that, and then any associated costs or staffing.
So do we know if AOE made the recommendation to the school board? The SB January?
About graduation requirements? Yes, and you have that. They also sent their recommendations to you all. And the reports sheet that I gave to Daphne links has a link to that report.
We'll have some testimony.
So I suppose I cannot testify that they gave it to the state board. I'm making an assumption. Section 12 through 20, I think in the interest of time, we can just say that sections 12 through 20 are create the state aid school construction program. So section 20 repeals all of the then current law for school construction.
Section 12, did you?
Nope, section 20 repeals the current law.
Oh, okay.
Current law meaning the law that was in effect prior to Act 73. And then sections 12 through 18 are the new updated pieces of that law. The state aid school construction program, so sections 12, 13, 16, 17, and 18 do not go into effect until July 1 of 2026.
Just to quickly clarify, the section 20, that repeals the moratorium that we have.
The moratorium was about money flowing from the legislature to the school construction program. The laws were always on the books.
Okay.
So the moratorium was on the appropriations essentially.
Okay.
So it's a great question. So what section 20 does, it gets rid of, it repeals the school construction program statutes with the process for application and all of the criteria that AOE would be looking at, et cetera. If the state were to be putting that money forward, and if there were to be a program to actually run. And sections 12 through 18 put new laws on books, including a special fund for school construction. Whether there's money in there to actually stand up this program and run it, I think is an open policy question for you all.
I think it would be good to look at what we repealed language wise, not we stopped giving the aid, but I don't think we gave enough time to school construction last year and the idea of what we do propose to fund in the future.
Well, that's if that's what's here, what we're proposing to fund in the future.
I think it's fuzzy.
Right.
I don't feel like we own.
So you'd
this
like to do
language.
a weekly,
We didn't, it wasn't ours, and I would have liked to
Yeah.
dig in here and we never did.
and we can do that.
Yeah, that would be good.
Didn't AOE have a part of that too? Like some of the money, when they talked about the foundation formula, if a school opted or didn't use some of the money that they got for student, that money went back into the construction fund.
We don't have any funding, as I understand it, any funding stream yet.
Well, let's see what makes up your special fund.
And we have the report, right? That we have that, right?
Yeah.
We're even scheduling we have time scheduled for when?
For
The report, this, the school report.
for tomorrow,
Okay, so we're gonna start getting it tomorrow.
okay.
We'll go through the report.
And I will just say, I have not read this report. The state aid school construction advisory group which is section 14, took effect July 1, 2025. They are who you have a report from. And it was a specific recommendation regarding legacy debt and how that should be handled during consolidation. So not necessarily about school construction in general. I have not read the report, so perhaps it has other features to it.
So your,
So maybe another day, we can go through these sections more in more detail. How the school construction. That's probably a good idea.
So the school construction aid special fund section 16 is composed of any amount transferred to it by the General Assembly and then the interest that money earns. But you are correct, it's correct, the Senator Williams. At some point during the work you all did on H454, there was a waterfall in there. I believe from supplemental district spending.
yeah, that's right. But that didn't survive in Senate Finance?
I don't remember where or when. I believe that money is now being used to buy down tax rate, is available to buy down tax rates. If there's access. But that when John is in the hot seat, ask him. Okay, so I'm putting a mind asterisk here next to sections 12 through 20. We're gonna have a school construction. So, okay.
And it would be good to revisit the history of what we did do when it was functioning.
Yes, John and I staffed the summer working group that did this, so we've got lots of materials, things to work with. Okay, section 21 is an amendment to section 16 VSA 8.8, which is the statute that dictates what types of educational programs a school district is allowed to make tuition payments to. And this went into effect on July 1, 2025. So this is current. This has been current law for the last 6 months. So it amends the law that restricts tuition. So public tuition payments can be made to public schools located in Vermont, independent schools that meet education quality standards, tutorial programs, approved education programs, a public school located in another state, and a therapeutic school located in another state or country. And approved independent schools that meet certain criteria, and I've listed them all out here. This is what's in the statute. The school has to be located in Vermont, has to have been approved under 166, which is the section that tells the state board the criteria for approval for independent schools. And it has to be geographically located either within a supervisory district that does not operate a public school for some or all grades as of July 1, 2024, or a supervisory union with one or more member school districts that does not operate a public school for some or all grades as of July 1, 2024.
Yes.
Being that this topic is completely independent schools, would it be appropriate to ask the independent school lobby to come in and essentially review the impact of this legislation for unintended consequences? We understand what the intended consequences were, but not quite sure I fully understand the impact and how it may have impacted special ed programs, God knows what, without really recognizing that we defunded that.
We will certainly be hearing from independent schools if we can. Yeah. Yes.
But this was not about therapeutics.
Therapeutic approved independent schools are an allowable tuition receiver, if you will, as long as they are approved in their home law in their other state or country, and then that would include Vermont.
But I guess to kind of articulate a little further.
Yeah,
So
what is
let's say it's not therapeutic, but we're all talking about mental health, et cetera, et cetera. Some kids go to schools which are a little not classical, but we may have defunded. And I'm not saying we did. I have a constituent that we have. I'm just looking for, just send a flyer up to the independent school lobby. Is there anything we did which we didn't really intend to do? It's having a negative consequence for our students. That's all. It's all.
I feel like
the
we
answer
would
is
have
no.
heard that, and there is litigation around this.
I think we need to take this is, not a hot priority, but at some point in the next couple of weeks, just a,
Okay,
30-minute summary of what did happen, good, bad, or indifferent.
And I want to make sure I understand that the foundation formula is tied to a lot of other conditions right now. But if a foundation formula was advanced this year, was the strings were cut from other things that may inhibit it from happening, the independent schools would live under that same foundation formula.
well,
We haven't gotten there yet.
John,
Okay,
This is just who is allowed to get money,
Right.
not how much they get.
right, okay.
So continuing with the requirements in order for an independent school to be eligible to receive tuition, they have to have had at least 25% of their student enrollment during the 23-24 school year composed of tuition students, and they also have to comply with class size minimums. Section 21 also adds definition of therapeutic schools. So I've added that here directly from the law. And then section 22 is a tuition transition. So if a student that was enrolled for the 2024-25 school year, so last school year, or accepted for this school year, so they would be currently enrolled now, by an approved independent school that does not meet these new requirements, but it was allowed to receive tuition under the old law, those students can continue to receive tuition through graduation. Okay, sections 24 through 26 on pages 53 through 56 of your bill. And then the appointing authority for the State Board of Education. So the State Board of Education is composed of 10 members. Prior to Act 73, they were all gubernatorial appointees. What Act 73 did is it took 2 of those members and made one of them a House appointee and one a Senate appointee. The governor would retain appointment authority over the remaining 8 members, and that includes 2 student members. And then whenever there's a vacancy, the appointing authority that made the initial appointment to that seat would continue to appoint that seat.
Is this effective?
Yes,
Have they been appointed?
I don't know. So,
Okay.
so section 25 lays out a transition period appointment. So for the first vacancy after July 1, 2025, the speaker would make the appointment. The second vacancy, the Senate would make the appointment. The third vacancy, the governor would make the appointment, and then so on. I don't know if there have been any vacancies.
the vacancies.
Section 26, the governor under the law prior to Act 73 and under current law, the governor retains the authority to remove every board member regardless of who appointed them. However, if the governor exercises that right and removes a member, whoever made the original appointment would get to fill that vacancy. So if the governor removes someone that the Senate appointed, the Senate would then get to fill that seat. Here we get to the first piece of law in sections 1 through 33 that is tied to the foundation formula and the contingent effective dates. So section 27 is the tuition section. And you'll find that on pages 56 through 58 of the Act. Section 27 is contingently effective if and when the foundation formula take effect. So it's the same contingent effective date. And you'll see at the very bottom of this slide that asterisk is the contingency. So July 1, 2028 is the contingent effective date. If new school districts are operational and the cost factor formula report is received by the General Assembly, and you all have an opportunity to enact legislation in consideration of that report. So section 27 is not current law, and it will not go into effect until July 1, 2028, and only if the contingencies are met. You all can do whatever you want this year. You can.
But so that's just section 27.
Yes.
The rules about who can receive tuition
That
are
are to affect July 1, 2025. Yep.
This is how much do they get?
Yep. So the general, and it's a little unfair. I think we did it in the order that we did it because I am the tuitioning expert in my office, but it's a little unfair because we haven't reminded you all of the base and weight concept. But under the foundation formula, legislature would decide a base amount to fund each student at education, and then there would be weights on top of that base amount depending on the characteristics of the student. So some students will be unweighted, meaning they would just receive the base amount, and some students will receive one weight, some students will receive all weights. So it's going to be a different amount of money for each student. So for tuitioning under the foundation formula, the base and weights follow the student. So under current law, tuitioning is if it's a public school, the school district, the sending school district pays whatever the public school is charging. If it is an approved independent school, there's a number of ways we can figure out how much a school may receive. Average announced tuition is the most common factor, but electorate is allowed to agree to approve more than the average announced tuition and pay what the independent school is asking. And if an independent school is an area CTE center, the sending district has to pay what the independent school is asking. But under the foundation formula, there is no more asking for or setting tuition. The money follows the student. So it's going to be a different amount of money for each student.
I think I lost. It's going to be a different amount of money, but it's going to be standardized by the weight that they're eligible for.
So the
Right.
average student gets arbitrary number $15,500. And then if they have added weights, then it grows. That money follows that child.
And prior to this,
The school could have said, I charge $1,750, you need to pay us $1,750.
right, but the school district could also keep some of the money for the weighted student.
So the way it works now is that a school district has a budget. And they develop that. I am not a school business expert. I cannot begin to explain to you how they do all of that work to develop their school budget. That's not me. But they do that work and they put in all of the costs, right? Included in that, it's anticipated tuition payment.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine that there are other costs there,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's the budget that the electorate votes on. So a school district is getting whatever their electorate approves,
Mm-hmm.
which I am making an educated guess that is tuition payments and other costs necessary to operate the school district.
Mm-hmm.
And there's really no wiggle room on paying those fees, those tuition payments, right? That's a contract.
And now it can be different. Because right now it says the receiving school is prohibited from charging different fees to different schools.
We're not there yet.
Oh, okay.
So that's subsection B.
Oh,
So subsection B.
C.
C, okay.
oh. There's all kinds of numbers and letters, so, you know. Nowhere.
So every student for tuition under the foundation formula, base and weight follow the student. For grades 9 through 12, a receiving school may charge an additional fee, which can be up to 5% of the base amount. So 5% of $15,000, $3. Only if the receiving school has received approval from the state board to charge that fee. And the electorate of the school of each school district with at least one student attending the receiving school has approved supplemental district spending for the purpose of the fee and an amount to cover the fee. So if the electorate says, we're not going to raise extra money to cover this fee, then the school doesn't get to, the receiving school doesn't get to charge that.
Can that school then say they haven't met tuition, we don't want to take that shut or that student?
They could then opt to not
Except
receive tuition and the student would have to go somewhere else.
where the parent or guardian at,
But they have to charge the same fee to every student in every district. So it can't be District A gets this fee, District B gets this fee, District C gets this fee. It has to be a flat fee across the board.
And this construct applies to both public schools that take a receiving student, or they receive a student, and independent schools.
Yes. Yes, receiving school would be, excuse me, in section 47. A receiving school could be a public school or an approved independent school.
I ended up having a concern after our last school visit that my sense was that some non-operating districts take a bond vote for school infrastructure, and some non-operating districts do not. They might roll up whatever was requested for construction or maintenance or infrastructure into the individual student tuition payment. Are they allowed to, or does that dichotomy exist, that you can have a non-operating district that's still taking a bond vote for regional public high school or public school infrastructure, and some non-operating districts that just send tuition?
I'm not sure I follow. If a school district doesn't have a school building to
Supervisory union.
supervisory union is not, and it's not, does not take a vote on anything.
Supervisory union does not take a vote on anything.
Supervisory union is an administrative unit of control. There is no electorate of a supervisory union. School districts are the only units of government within our education system where the voters are voting on something. But the only unit of government.
I want to look into that more, because I just feel like what I heard was that within some supervisory union constructs, they are sharing bonding decisions. And within other supervisory unions, the towns that own the high school infrastructure are on their own for bonding.
That may be, I mean,
That could be.
If you are in a situation where it is a supervisory union that is made up of multiple school districts, and some of them operate schools and some of them don't. And historically, the students in the non-operating districts all go to the public school in the next door operating district. Public school is setting tuition at whatever it wants to set it.
Right.
The electorate of that school district is the only one voting on the bond. But how that payment is
Distributed through the supervisory union.
is distributed through the school district budget and the costs associated with that, I can't speak to. So how they are setting that tuition, there's rules around how
Sure.
that and everything. But how that plays out, I think it's gonna be a very case specific situation. But a supervisory union, there's no voters in the supervisory union. It is not a unit of government, an administrative unit.
So there's not a scenario in which a whole supervisory union is taking a bond vote.
No. There's no electorate to vote. You all, as a Dillon Rule state, create the pockets of the municipalities that can vote, and you decide what they can vote on. And supervisory unions, there's no voting authority or power.
We don't have supervision. Unless,
No, it's not concurrent.
unless we have a district map that says we do.
Yeah.
Or-
Well, but right now we have supervisory unions that
Yeah,
don't
right
all
now-
vote on shared infrastructure.
Right, and if you remember correctly, the superintendent said, we figured that into the tuition cost.
Which,
So that the student that's coming in is actually helping, when you give tuition does help.
right, but that's very different than an entire town taking a bond vote and sharing that infrastructure cost than saying these 7 students are gonna pay $5,000 more for tuition.
But the town will pay by, that'll be in their tax of that, rather than the whole town.
I asked the chair to look into the numbers about how equal that ends up being. Because it's very different from the communities that end up taking a bond vote and to me, that's one of the things Vermonters asked us to look at is bond votes can often fail if one town feels like, would we be shouldering the entire burden for this high school? And the towns around us might send us some tuition dollars for it. That's a very different conversation than an entire region taking a bond vote and supporting that school infrastructure, I believe.
Okay, it's on our
Okay.
list of things that.
Section 28 repeals all of the tuition statutes, spelled statutes wrong there. That would be unnecessary under the foundation formula. Again, that's contingently effective. Section 28A asks the State Board of Education to come up with an approval process for that extra fee, right? The State Board of Education has to give a receiving school approval to charge the fee, and so Section 28 is saying, okay, come up with a process for that approval process. And then we've already talked about how Section 28 and 27 is contingently effective on July 1, 2028. Along with the cost factor, along with the foundation formula. Mindful of time, I'm just gonna go fast now. Section 29 requires the Agency of Education to give you all a report on the state of special education. There's a hot link to that report right there. Section 30 requires the Agency of Education to come up with a 3-year strategic plan for the delivery of special education services. There's a hot link to that report. And then section 31 establishes one new permanent classified position within AOE to support the development of the 3-year strategic plan. And section 32 somehow got moved up a line, is an appropriation of $2,865,000 from the general fund to AOE in fiscal year 2026 for the enumerated in the amounts and for the reasons I've listed here. And then section 33 created or authorized 5 limited service classified positions in the position pool for AOE in fiscal year 2026 to support education transformation work. And I've listed out what those positions are.
Yes,
So for some mental housekeeping for my purposes, Act 60, 68, Act 46, Act 127, all go away with this Act 73, correct?
No.
Okay,
There's too much in all of those acts for me to say that they go away.
okay.
There's bits and pieces of all of those acts that haven't changed.
Okay.
But I can't.
This otherwise is explicit about any repeals that did happen.
Correct.
So you're seeing the section that was repealed from the tax rate backwards. What about this position? Is this position happening?
It said yes, we were simple.
Nothing, you know, nothing. Well,
yeah, I don't know the answer to that.
I'd really like to drill down into the
Yeah.
appropriation to the Agency of Education. I'm very concerned about how it's being spent, and they've never given us clear information on that.
We can certainly, we have them committed to talking about the restructuring and the positions.
anything else for me? Before I give out the hot seat.
I don't think so. Yeah,
Okay.
I don't think so. Thank you.
Of course.
John, for into consume the hot.
I'm so excited. Yeah.
Okay. Do you want us to take a quick break or?
Yeah,
We can.
I'm taking a break.
Okay,
I'll be right back.
all right, let's keep going.
Hello.
happy new year.
That's it.
Welcome back.
Thank you. Happy New Year.
Never left.
It does feel that night.
Well, hey, we're here. Sure, thank you.
Oh, I'm looking for Senator Weeks. And. Oh. I have 2 things. Thanks, you.
Still want me to hold off or shall I
No,
go?
I think you've got it. Introduce yourself. Was it a third? Yeah. So we'll be picking up with section 34.
So, afternoon, John Gray, Office of Legislative Counsel. Pick up with Act 73 Education Finance sections. Just because I'm not going to be looking directly at the text, I have a lot of organizational slides here to keep us focused on what sections I'm talking about. But if it becomes distracting or unuseful, I'm happy to jump to the text as an alternative.
As. See a lot of class.
So, two of these.
Oh, this is the next.
I just had.
Oh,
So I'm jumping in, as the chair stated, education finance begins in section 34. If you're following in the act, which I kind of hope that you aren't, but if you are, on page 67. And we're talking about generally chapter 133 of title 16, which is your state funding of public education chapter. So just as an overview of the first set of sections that I'm going to go over, that's 34 through 45C. I'm going to keep returning to this table as we go through, just so you can see where we are. But high level, setting up a foundation formula, as you recall, establishing a base amount, educational opportunity payments, people waiting, creating some changes related to the supplemental district spending, sets up reports that are related to the foundation formula, and then there's some transitionary measures as well. And I'll talk about conforming changes and the like, but there's some minor things I'll try to pop through quickly. So, and as Beth noted, a lot of these pieces are continually effective July 1, 2028. You can see I've got the tables lined up so you can see the corresponding effective dates. What's easy to tell here is all the foundation formula is continually effective July 1, 2028. The pieces that you see effective on passage, those are your reports. So of course we sign those on passage so people can commence beginning their reports. And then there's a technical piece for 45C that was effective on passage, but largely your foundation formula rollout continually effective July 1, 28. And just so you can see, this is the specific contingency. I'm sure that Beth has talked about this already, but two factors. New school districts have assumed responsibility for the education of resident students, and the expert has responded with that foundation formula report under section 45A, which I'll get into a little bit later. So let's start with core education finance overhaul in Act 73. Talking about sections 34 and 35. This is setting your base and weights. So I'm trying to do high level. I don't intend to go too much into the actual numbers themselves. I know that Ezra has some background on these pieces, but I thought we might get bogged down if we start jumping into all the different weights and various pieces. So section 34 is establishing your base amounts. This is kind of your core foundation formula, the per pupil amount of $15,033 that is going to be inflation adjusted. And then, as you know, the kind of payment that a school district will receive under this new formula, as opposed to our current system, which funds ed spending writ large, each school district receives what we call an educational opportunity payment. And that's determined for each school district based on the weighted student count. So you just take your weighted long-term membership for your school district, you multiply it by that 15,033, and you get the educational opportunity payment for the school district. Also worth noting that section 34 repeals the inconsistent pieces of existing chapter 133 that deal with our current education funding system. So we don't need concepts for education spending anymore because we aren't setting up a system that fully funds whatever locally voted budgets occur. So section 35, that's the creation of your base amount and your educational opportunity payment, core foundation formula concepts. Section 35 is touching your weighting section. So pupil weighting is this section 4010. And just high level, what's happening here is you're left with a grade level weight for pre-K. There's no other grade level weights included in section 35. There's a slight update to the economic disadvantage weight. In existing law, we have English language learner weight, but it's not refined across different pieces like proficiency level and formal education. You may recall we talked about that acronym SLIGHT, students with limited or interrupted formal education. That's one of the refinements of the English language learner weights. So we have a more built out, distinguished EL weighting system. We've moved away from the census block grants and added special education weights, and that's distinguished by disability costs. You may recall that there's three different special education weights provided, depending on the kind of disability that a child has. And then additionally, repealing the small school and sparsity weights, which, as you'll see shortly, were replaced with those support grants for small school students.
So a question on the weights, and I was thinking about this today, is that when we pick a weight for any one of those, how do they come up with the calculation, and is that calculation to educate just one child? So let's say we have English learning students and you have one. So that weight has whatever, we'll say $1,000 added on to it. And but say your school has 10. So now you have $10,000, but now you still only have that one teacher to teach 10. So as you gain more students, should that number go down, or was it based on what it costs to educate that one child at that amount?
I don't think I'm best positioned to speak to the empirics behind the way that the weights were determined.
All right, thanks.
So,
That's something I'd like to find out about. Is as you gain in any special needs child, that there's certain individuals one-on-one, but when it can grow, was that number always designed just for one student rather than a multi students?
Yes, because so it is, I think it's the most generous weight that's currently contemplated in the bill we passed. And that is so that if you have one student, you still have the ability to meet their needs. But then there's 7 different weights each student could receive. So the idea being, if someone is at a 1, if they really need a lot of one-on-one support, they are getting a quite a generous weight. If they need a little bit of after school support or something like that, the weight is less. So that in my mind speaks to the whole goal is to have a generous enough amount when you only have one student who needs significant support. And if you happen to have a lot of students who are 3s or 4s or somewhere close to proficiency, you're getting less money that would speak more to meeting their needs as a group.
Okay. So
there's 7 different weights.
Some other things worth remembering, and I think this is implicit in the comment. The weights are additive, so a special education child could pick up additional weights as well. So just something to keep in mind with it. Yeah, you could have English language, you could have economic disadvantage, so you could pick up additional weights along with other things. So sections 34 and 35, core foundation formula, establishing base EOP, your weighting system. Next, we're going to jump to the support grants. And if you're following the act, which again, I hope you're not, but pages 79 through 81, we just talked about repealing the sparsity and small school weights. Those are being supplanted by the specific grants that are extended to school districts for particular schools. So section 37 creates a small school support grant. Got that 3157 figure. And it's important to note who actually qualifies for this grant. A small school must have less than 100 pupils in their 2-year average enrollment. Additionally, you may recall that the State Board of Education is required annually to determine that that school is small by necessity. So the idea is to limit this weight to schools that are in a position where it's by necessity that they're receiving this additional funding per student. You also created a sparse school support grant. It's around $2,000 per enrolled student. Similar conditions for that kick into the sparse school. You have to be in a city, town, or incorporated village with less than 55 persons per square mile. You also have to have received an annual determination from the State Board of Education, sparse by necessity, and those standards for the State Board to determine this were to be built out under Section 8B. I don't know the status of the standards themselves, but those are required components of receiving these grants. Not only do you have to meet objective criterion, you also have to be determined to be by necessity that kind of school by the State Board of Education. So those are replacing your existing sparsely used small school weights with support grants. As you can imagine, implementing the combination formula necessitates a number of repeals to existing education funding concepts. So that's what you see in section 42. Not going to bore you too much with the details of these, but they remove some technical provisions. Statutes that only reference defined terms that have now been repealed. Cases of suspension of the way education finance was working under the existing system. As you can see, the census block grants, that's for your special education, that's repealed because you're now doing a special education weight. Similarly, the categorical aid for English learners, you now have a more distinguished defined EL weight. This one will be quick, but just noting some technical conforming and other changes in sections 36 and 40. We made some conforming changes just to pick up the new defined terms. Those are your education payments that go out to school districts. Instead of referencing education spending, we need to reference the educational opportunity payments, and the concept we'll come to later, and I'll talk about in more detail, supplemental district spending, which I'll spend a little bit more time on, just the details of how that works. Section 39 cleans up some outdated language in the stabilization reserve. There's some archaic language that references the original act in which that was enacted. And then section 45C is just a technical update. You can think of this as sort of here because this is the vehicle. It delays the first meeting of the Ed Fund Advisory Committee, which was tended to start this past summer. And it extends it to July 15th of this year. The thinking being there's been so much change, right, with Act 73 that they weren't in a position to respond to these changes. So it's just delaying that first meeting. Next, just because we're going, relatively in order within the Act, and because we're talking about Title 16 education rather than taxation and finance at this point, we're going to talk about the impacts of the supplemental district spending on Title 16 before I actually talk about supplemental district spending. So just know that I am going to talk about how the math works for those pieces, assuming you're interested in knowing how the math works for those pieces. So section 38 creates, just makes the pathway for your new supplemental district spending. So as you know, supplemental district spending is a tax that's imposed entirely locally, unlike the new statewide education tax that will be imposed to raise funds for the educational opportunity payments. So we just need a pathway for where that local revenue, that SDS revenue will go, and it goes into the Ed Fund. That's all that section 38 is doing, creating the home for those revenues. Section 41, this one is key, so I will slow down a bit for this. One of the complaints of the budgeting process has been that folks can't see the impacts economically of their decision making when they vote on the school budget. With this move to a foundation formula, the actual December 1 letter is going to contain a recommendation for the statewide education tax rate that's going to produce what you need to fund those educational opportunity payments across the state. Additionally, the commissioner will recommend a supplemental district spending yield, and unlike the existing yield, which is dependent on the budgets that school districts vote up until whatever date at which they finalize those budgets, this yield is really a mathematical exercise. And when we get to the supplemental district spending technicalities, I'll explain how the yield is determined. But basically, the outcome of this change is the budget that school districts are going to vote on is not the broad budget they vote on now. They just vote on any extra spending they want to pursue locally beyond the educational opportunity payment that they would be receiving. And accompanying that budget vote would be a line that states what the impact for their taxes would be. It would say the supplemental district spending tax rate shall be, and it's really a mathematical equation. You divide your per pupil supplemental district spending by that yield, and it tells you what the rate will be for your town. So budgets would look quite different under this. You'd be voting on something different, and you would know the economic impact of what you're doing.
And many districts will presumably not vote at all.
Yeah, you might have no reason to vote.
Yeah.
Perfect. Section 43, this is kind of accompanying that section 38, which created the pathway for supplemental district spending revenues to flow to the Ed Fund. This just creates a reserve within the Ed Fund. in which those revenues would be situated, but it's important, it creates a reserve for the recapture that's produced. I'll talk about this more once we get to the concept, but as you know, the imposition of the supplemental district spending tax will raise extra funds due to the equalization measures that are included in Act 73. So because of that, you're going to have some extra money that isn't flowing, assuming people vote on supplemental district spending. They'll have some extra funds available that aren't being paid out to the school districts for their voted supplemental district spending. So that would be reserved here and used for two purposes. It would be used to offset any miscalculation. So, sometimes there's variation in the budgets or the like. So if there's a miscalculation, you could take these extra raised funds and you could apply them to offset any miscalculation. And then secondarily, assuming you had funds remaining after any corrections, essentially, you would apply those funds to the following year's statewide education property tax rate to reduce the following year taxes. So that's what your recapture, which is produced through the supplemental district spending tax, can offer the state. At least it's situated here. I'm going to pause for a second. I know that. Go ahead.
So for a district seeking to spend the 5%, for many of the districts, it would actually cost more than 5%.
That's exactly right.
Based on their.
That's exactly right. When we get to the actual, and I'll just preview it here, but the way that the supplemental district spending yield is set and the rate is determined, it benchmarks everyone's rate to the school district with the lowest taxing capacity. So you can think of it as you're having to pay the rate, your district is having to pay the rate that the lowest taxing capacity district would have to pay to raise the funds that you're voting. And the result for a community that has greater property wealth in applying the same tax rate that the lowest capacity district would apply is going to raise extra funds, just because by applying the same rate to a higher property value, you produce more funds. So that's how you get recapture. And it means that every district other than the lowest capacity district will pay more than the actual wet rate required if they entirely funded it locally. But where you stand relative to that will depend on the amount of property wealth you have available per long-term membership. So if you're close to the lowest capacity, you're going to have a quite close rate to what you would have to pay anyway. But if you're a quite wealthy district per long-term membership, then you could be paying substantially more in that supplemental district spending tax rate. So it's part of why there was a lot of discussion last session about why the school district boundaries configuration matters for determining the equalization measures and for determining the supplemental district spending tax. It really affects the amount of revenues that's raised, the kind of imposition of taxes that are through the act. So configuration matters for these purposes. Next, we can jump to reports. So we've got a set of reports here. Section 44 tasks the Agency of Education with reporting several guidelines for minimum transportation to be provided and covered by transportation reimbursement grant. You've also got a report from JFO on inflationary measures and funding for pre-K. And then lastly, we have this more wholesale under Section 45A, this kind of larger, longer term report due this upcoming December. And this is updates to the foundation formula. So moving away from special education weights to a reliance on special education services, updates to any other weights as empirically necessary. So you can think of this as pretty broad exploration of what the contractor could touch within the foundation formula. In addition to updates to the foundation formula, examine suitable sparsity measures. You may recall that the sparse schools requires the geographic measure that's used is town, village, some other geographic measure that I've forgotten, but it's along those lines. We debated zip code at one point last session. This is tasking that contractor with thinking about what is the best geographic measure for getting at sparsity. Additionally, examining the cost of secondary students and whether a weight would be warranted for those. As I noted before, on Section 35, the pupil weighting section only currently has a weight for pre-K. and then accounting for CTE within the foundation formula. The other big piece to note about this report is you'll recall the contingent effective language that I talked about before. So all of the foundation formula is contingent on contingently effective July 1, 2028. And one of the contingencies is you've got the new school district boundaries that assume responsibility. The other is that you've received this report, that the legislature has had the chance to enact any updates based on the information that it finds in this report. Lastly, for this set of sections, we're going to talk about the EOP transition. Just thinking about the early year rollout of the foundation formula, we're going to be moving from locally varying homestead rates, locally voted budgets, to a fixed EOP determined by weight times weighted long-term membership. Sorry, base amount times weighted long-term membership. So it may take some time for school districts to acclimate to this. There's some transitionary measures included. So for fiscal years 29 through 2032, there's a measure included to move folks from their ed spending onto the new EOP. And the way that's done, I don't know if the math is especially interesting, but you identify the gap between a district's FY29 EOP. So that's in FY29, that base amount times their weighted long-term membership. And you determine the difference between their FY25 education spending. That gives you a gap. And basically, you prorate that gap to move people incrementally toward their actual EOP that they'll be on. And by FY 2033, a school district would then be fully onto its EOP and would then sort of more smoothly transition onto that payment than if you'd gone directly from FY 28 ed spend to FY 29 EOP.
No, but it's just picture terms on this page here, that a district that is a lower spending district would have 5 years to transition to where they're going to be required to be.
Exactly.
On.
Exactly. So just in summary, for the total of the sections that we've walked through, high level, you've got a foundation formula with a base amount of $15,033 per pupil plus updated weights at the pre-K, special education, economic disadvantage, EL. You've got the new concept of educational opportunity payments to school districts based on their weighted long-term membership. You've now got, in place of the pre-existing weights, you've now got supplementary support grants for small schools and sparse schools. And then, significantly, as we talked about, budget votes are exclusive to that supplemental district spending. They're just about what's above the EOP. And they would include the required supplemental district spending tax rate for voters to see. So changing gears a little bit, we're now at section 46, and this is where we start talking about the education property tax changes, which are relatively, talk a bit about the supplemental district spending, but there's some pieces in here that I think are a bit beyond the pieces we've touched before in committee. But section 46, and that's on page 93 if you're following in the act. And in terms of in the statutes, we're now in Title 32, taxation of finance, and we're primarily in chapter 135, the education property tax. We are going to jump around a bit, just like we'll talk about some other concepts that are in the act, just so you're aware of them, but sort of less crucial to the education overhaul. So here's the set of sections for 46 through 59. You've got your supplemental district spending. You get your December 1 letter and the imposition of your property taxes. We've got a new homestead exemption, which I'll just hit very high level, placing the property tax credit with the homestead exemption, and a couple of conforming changes. Mainly for these sections, I'll try to spend time on the supplemental district spending, which is, I think, most kind of relevant to the discussions here, but I'm happy to touch other pieces if it's helpful to you guys to hear about them. Again, I've got a table of effective dates, and as you can see, all of these pieces continually effective July 1, 2028. The one outlier you're seeing on the left side is July 1, 2027. That's your December 1 letter. December 1 letter that anticipates the foundation formula rollout needs to be in place before you actually kick in the rates. You need to get those recommendations from the commissioner. So that goes effective preceding the FY29 year. And then I think you have a report that's effective on passage for 753. Again, just reminding you of the contingency language, those two pieces, school districts contemplated by the act have assumed responsibility for the education of students and that you've received that foundation formula report pursuant to section 45A. Giving the General Assembly an opportunity to enact any legislation in consideration. So let's jump to everyone's favorite piece, the definitions for supplemental district spending. So the left side column is going to be this kind of simple, plain English way to think about what's being proposed here, and then the right describes some of the math that accompanies it. So we're replacing current funding formula language with new definitions for supplemental district spending. So your supplemental district spending is the spending, as we've talked about, that voters of a district may approve above their educational opportunity payment. And as the chair has noted, there's actually a cap in place on what that SDS can be. It's up to a cap of 5% of the district's unweighted foundation amount. And what I mean by unweighted foundation is, for other pieces, we talk about weighted long-term membership. And here we're talking about an unweighted foundation amount. So it would be your unweighted student count, just straight student count, multiplied by that base amount. You get 5% of that. That would be your allowable supplemental district spending. We'll also come into a bit to see that there are transitionary measures for this piece as well. Just as there's rollout to get people acclimated to the EOP, there's rollout to not so quickly impose the 5% cap. Important to note is that the supplemental district spending tax is imposed uniformly across districts. It's not imposed across all districts. It's only imposed for folks who vote supplemental district spending, and their rate is determined locally. But the SDS tax is imposed in a uniform way across districts, meaning that each person is paying the same rate to receive the same amount of funds in return. So to raise supplemental district spending, a district must impose the rate that would be required to raise those funds to the lowest tax capacity district. It's raised entirely locally. The way that this works is we benchmark the rate to the school district with the lowest tax capacity. And that's your district that's anticipated to have the lowest grand list for long-term membership.
I know we went over this last year, but taxing capacity, can you refresh my memory? And
Yeah.
Grand list.
Yep. So taxing capacity, we're just thinking about how much property wealth do you have available per pupil, essentially, is the way to think about it. Because when we're trying to describe or thinking about the funds that a school district is trying to raise, we're talking about what they're raising per pupil, right? So a district could be incredibly wealthy, but have a ton of students, right? So it doesn't matter so much that they have infinite property wealth. The figure that you really care about is that property wealth per pupil. And so that's what your grand list per long-term membership here is meant to get at. Your taxing capacity is how much property wealth can you put forward per student, basically. And it's telling you the kind of rate that you're going to have to impose, because the more property wealth that you have available per pupil, the lower the rate that you can impose, right?
With the more wealth you have, the lower the rate you can impose.
I'm just saying, mathematically, to raise the same amount, it's not the way the supplemental district spending tax would work. But if you're just thinking in terms of the way that you would raise revenues, the more wealth you have available per pupil, the lower the rate you could charge to raise funds, because you have no
Okay, I get it.
available. Yeah. But it's not the supplemental district spending tax is applied uniformly. So everyone is going to pay the same rate to raise the same funds. And if you happen to be wealthier, that is, you have a higher taxing capacity, you're going to end up raising additional funds above what you voted. And that additional funding is going to be your recapture that's sent back to that reserve that can be used to decrease following year statewide property taxes.
Send back the ed fund general.
Yep. So it flows, all of the supplemental district spending tax revenues go to the ed fund. And then it's broadly made available in the way that other funds are made available in the ed fund to pay out any payments that are due under the ed fund, other than your supplemental district spending tax, which is going to go out, your supplemental district spending. Those payments will go out to districts, and then you're going to have an element remaining. That's your recapture, and that's going to be situated within that reserve. But you're correct that all of the funds flow directly to the ed fund, and then it's the recapture, not the whole of the supplemental district spending tax revenue. It sits within the reserve.
So the recapture goes to the reserve, and the reserve is two pieces. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
And so the reserve can only be exclusively used by that district, or is it?
No, no, no,
No,
no.
okay.
So the reserve is broadly available for two purposes. The first is if numbers have come in wonky during the year and there's some mismatch, right? You could use funds within that reserve to offset the miscalculation that produced that. So maybe some calculation, there's a mishap with your SDS calculation. So you could use the reserve funds to offset that. And then I think kind of the broader purpose stated, the hope was the extra funds that you raise, which depending on district boundary configuration could be quite substantial, right? Like if you have someone who has 3 times the taxing capacity in another district, they're paying the same rate, they're raising 3 times the funds. So the second purpose, which I think was stated as kind of the more primary purpose, is that it could be used to lower property tax, the statewide property tax of the following year. So it's not used for future SDS, it's used to reduce everyone's taxes in the following year.
Thank you.
Just to explain a little bit about how this is calculated, we use a new yield here, a supplemental district spending yield, which translates this concept into action. Basically, we say how much revenue per long-term membership could be raised in your lowest taxing capacity district at a rate of $1 per $100 of equalized education property value. Knowing that if you take your district's per pupil supplemental district spending, so take your fully voted supplemental district spending divided by your long-term membership, you took whatever that is and divided it by this figure, it would produce the rate that would be required for the lowest taxing capacity district to raise those funds. So the yield is a way of converting your payments into what would be required in the lowest taxing capacity district. And that's the method of equalization that's proposed in Act 73, ensuring that everyone has to pay the same rate for the same kinds of funds, regardless of amount of property wealth they have available per pupil. And as we talked about, this is what leads to recapture, and you can just think of that as excess revenue. And again, it's made available for those purposes, potentially buying down following year statewide education property taxes. That's great. I'm happy to not keep talking about this. Okay.
So it's just interesting to note that for many districts, the 5% will really be more like 2% of the budget, because the 5% only relates to 15,000 to the base amount, right? So it doesn't relate to weights. And
It doesn't include weights.
so
That's correct.
for many districts, the budget's going to be substantially more, or their income will otherwise be substantially more than the 15,000 because of weights.
Mhm.
And in some districts, it'll be more acute, and some districts less acute. So in some districts, the 5% won't really be applied.
Yep.
5% add-on to the budget will be a 2% or 3% add-on to the budget.
For sure.
And
For
it's
sure.
weights.
Yeah,
So-
if you wanted to describe the cap in terms of educational opportunity payments instead of an unweighted foundation formula, it would be a lower percentage. Yeah.
Okay.
So I love this. This one's pretty easy to understand. This transitionary measure. It does occur across a longer time period than the earlier transitions we talked about, which were 5-year transitions. It's more of a 10-year transition. So this is to allow school districts greater supplemental district spending in the early years of foundation formula rollout. We talked about the statutory factor is a 5% cap, but we have some notwithstanding language here, some session law that says for fiscal years 2029 through 2033, so those first years in which you're also going through your tax rate transitions, your EOP transitions, all of that. For those first years, you can spend up to 10% of that unweighted foundation amount in supplemental district spending, and then we're declining each year by 1% until in FY 2038, you've gotten to the statutory factor of 5%. So first years of your foundation formula rollout, a school district can spend more in supplemental district spending. For the first 5 years, that's your 10% cap, and then declining the next one. Now we're going to jump into actual taxes. Just going to be super high level. Section 47, this amends your 32 VSA section 402, that's your primary education property tax liability section. This is the section that imposes the statewide education property taxes. Just to remind everyone where we currently are, the current system we have funds local budgets, whenever they're voted, fully funds those budgets using locally varying homestead property tax rates. This new foundation formula system would just have a statewide education tax rate. It wouldn't have that locally varying homestead rate. So this replaces Vermont's existing property tax mechanism to fully fund locally voted school budgets, to account for that variation through varying homestead rates with a statewide education tax. Think about the reason that's possible is because you've moved to this EOP instead of funding whatever the districts may vote. You're now just funding base times weighted long-term membership for each district. You tally up those figures, and then you can spread that cost across the whole state with a single statewide education tax rate. However, that education tax rate would be adjusted by statutory factors. We don't have those yet. What you'll see in Act 73 is just that the statutory factors are one, meaning that all of the rates would be the same regardless of tax classification. Those are yet to be determined. But the education tax would be adjusted by statutory factors to assign liabilities, different property tax classifications. And as you may recall, we still have our homestead. We still have non-homestead. Our non-homestead now looks different. Act 73, you have non-homestead, non-residential, and non-homestead residential. The way to think about having these different classifications just from a raising education revenues perspective is that you have different levers you can pull now, right? If you want to assign more liability to one class, you can change the statutory factors. That's what the statutory factors allow you to do. Although, the expectation is that you receive a recommendation as to what the appropriate statutory factors would be. And then this section imposes that local supplemental district spending tax. So you've got now your statewide education tax rate, and you've got your local supplemental district spending tax rate. Not everyone's going to face that, just districts that vote supplemental district spending. And I can talk about the calculation again, but it's done in that way I described, using the supplemental district spending yield, comparing your per pupil supplemental district spending against that yield. Section 48 is touching the December 1 letter. As you know, we currently received the December 1 letter with a set of recommendations related to yields. And those remain in flux as districts are passing budgets, full spending their budgets. We don't need to have those same pieces anymore with the new system. So Section 48 repeals recommendations for the yields in the December 1 letter. And it would task the Commissioner of Taxes with recommending a statewide education property tax rate. And again, this would be something that could be done because the revenues you're trying to figure out, how much you need to raise, are determined by that base times weighted long-term membership. So it's a different game than it is under the existing system. So CAF would recommend that statewide education property tax rate to fund spending for the ed fund. There still are questions as to what non-property tax revenues are going to come in. So it's not all certain, but you're in a greater place of certainty than you would be under the existing system. It also tasks the Commissioner of Taxes with recommending that supplemental district spending yield. Again, this would be really a mathematical exercise. You would just identify the school district that's expected to have the lowest grand list per long-term membership. And you would ask, what could they raise at a 1% tax rate at $1 per $100 of equalized education property tax value? That's the yield. You can just divide your district's SDS by that to determine the rate that you need. Sections 49 and 50 are just conforming changes to Chapter 135 to pick up those rate changes. We're no longer referencing. We don't have to distinguish non-homestead and homestead in the same way now that we're using a statewide tax rate that's adjusted by statutory factors, although it's still we call out. We also have proposed, or Act 73 contains a homestead rate transition. So for those first years, FYs 2029 through 2032, to ease the transition off locally good homestead rates, you would again identify a transition gap by taking what would be your FY29 statewide homestead rate. It's the rate that everyone would be paying under the new education tax system. And you would determine the difference between that and the district's prior fiscal year locally varying homestead rate. The year prior, It's not the foundation formula. You're still under the current system. So you're just determining the gap between FY 28 homestead rate and your FY 29 homestead rate. The difference between those is one is locally varying based on the budget you voted, and one is funding the EOP under the new foundation formula. And again, you prorate that across 5 years, as the chair described. So you're incrementally moving folks off of their FY 28 homestead rate and onto their. Some other measures I don't recall if I talked about it here last year, but I'll just hit high level. Tied to these changes, new income sensitivity measures. So repealing the property tax credit, but replacing it with a new homestead exemption that reduces the amount of house site value subject to any education tax. So instead of a credit that applies to prior year taxes, right, we'd actually reduce the amount of the house site value that's subject to taxation. So you're in the first place paying less in taxes rather than receiving the credit against it. And your new income sensitivity measures would be for households with not more than 115,000 in household income. You have a range of exemption values available that be as low as 10% if you're at the upper end of that income threshold. And if you're between 0 and 25,000 in household income, you could have a homestead exemption of 95% of the first 425,000 in house site value. So substantial exemption against the house site value. Section 51 is just, we state the statutory purposes of exemptions. And as you can see, the point is to reduce property tax liability for Vermont households with low and moderate household income. And then section 53, there were discussions last year as to whether or not folks felt comfortable with the income sensitivity measures that were covered here. So section 53 tasks tax with reporting by the end of this year, December 15th, on an alternative homestead exemption structure for consideration. And that would include things like an analysis of the implications of moving to income sensitivity measures that recognize higher household income. So benefits could accrue to households of up to 175,000. That would be just for consideration, report from the tax department. Is there another way to set up the homestead exemption structure that maybe benefits more functions?
So just to make sure I understand, that's the 115 is a cutoff,
Yes, that's correct.
and not if you're 116.
That's correct. It is, I think maybe part of what you're getting at is that the way the current income sensitivity measures work, there's math that happens behind the scene to determine the point at which the income yields and the property tax yields meet. So the statutory threshold that you see isn't necessarily the point of cutoff of the benefit. This is a straight cutoff. If you're above 115,000, you're not getting the homestead exemption.
Yes.
So this is income only, no asset test whatsoever.
That's right.
Is incorrect.
And then I'm ending with a whimper, I guess, conforming and other changes. So section 54 through 56, these are just updating references from the property tax credit to the homestead exemption. And then section 57, it updates the directives of the Education Fund Advisory Committee to address updates for the foundation from the rollout and the June homestead exemption. And just to summarize this set of education property tax sections, Act 73 replaces locally varying homestead rates with a statewide education tax that would be adjusted for tax classifications. It imposes a supplemental district spending tax for districts to raise funds locally for any voted SDS. It repeals the property tax credit system, and it doesn't repeal the municipal, and it creates a homestead exemption with new income sensitivity measures. And I just wanted to have this beautiful slide. We do have an act summary that's like 2 pages or 3 pages. So if you want to read a dense document that describes all this again, you are free to do so.
Well, sort of asked us before long, I think. Yeah.
There'll be more.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought I could just go home.
Did you think that all by yourself?
Do I?
Did you think this up all by yourself?
You guys thought this up. I had no role to play in it. This was our doing.
and finance.
Yes.
Thank you. Yes,
Sure.
We will see you again.
Sounds good. And let me know if you guys want, more details and anything. Happy to partner. So.
I think we're gonna have that's up.
Just making sure it's connected up here. All right, apologies for the slowness with technology. This is my first testimony of the session, so still getting used to joining the Zoom. For the record, Edward Holden, Joint Fiscal Office, and today we're just going to be talking a little bit more about the foundation formula that Mr. John Gray spoke about. He kind of did high level of foundation formula, and I thought I would give you all a little bit more of an in-depth look at the different weights contained in Act 73. So just as a reminder, you'll see this slide a million times from my office, but not partisan legislative office. Just want to remind everyone of that. So just quickly to remind you all about a few things with foundation formulas and all the abbreviations that we will be using today. So long-term weighted average daily membership. That is the long-term weighted count that John referenced when he spoke about how you determine the total education opportunity payment that the district will be receiving. So in my presentation, you'll see that abbreviated as your LTWADM. And so that is the weighted student count that drives the funding to your district and foundation formulas. That would be your base. Every student, receives that 1.0 base. And then you add in weights, whether it's economic disadvantage, English learner, pre-K, whatever it is. And once those weights have been added in, you have your weighted daily membership, and that's what you are then multiplying whatever your base amount is. And so, again, some of these weights are abbreviated. So FPL, federal, so that's going to be your economic disadvantaged students. You also have your EL, which stands for English learner students, and SPED, special education students. And as a reminder, the weights under Act 73 are additive. So you just take one plus whatever the weights are. So this just kind of visually illustrates what I just relayed to you all. Your base amount times your long-term weighted ADM is your education opportunity payment for district. And so Act 73's foundation formula. So again, as John spoke about earlier, there's a base amount of $15,033 per year long-term. So that's the ADM, that's your 1.0 students. Okay, so that's the base that every student would be receiving. And then the student may also receive weights based on any demographic conditions, such as the ones listed here on this table. So these are the weights that Act 73 has. Some of them you'll see are categories that you have in effect before Act 73. And then some of them, again, a lot of this is a little bit repeat of what John spoke about, just want to put some numbers there. So the weights are all derived from the memo released by Drs. Colby and Baker in April 3rd of 2025. And I've linked that memo there at the bottom of the slide if you care to visit that and review that testimony. And those were calculated by the two using their education cost function formula, which is intended to determine the sufficient level of funding needed for a student to, excuse me, have to have enough funding for their education, based on what class they fall into. So that's where these weights came from, that calculation that they ran. And special education census block grant has been replaced with tiered weights. So you'll see that here you now have child with a disability and you have categories A, B, and C. So under Act 73, if a child's disability falls under category A, they would receive an additional 0.79 worth of funding. Category B, 1.89, et cetera. And that's all in addition to the one. So a student with category A would actually, and nothing else, would be a total of 1.79 times that 15,033 when the district's determining how much funding they're receiving. And so that's different from previously where you had a special education census block grant. So this is different.
And who decides these weights?
So all of these weights were determined by the Colby and Baker memo as they're presented here. And then going forward, part of Act 73 required JFA to contract with contractors to redetermine, see if these weights needed to be adjusted or not. So that's where they came from and how they'll be adjusted.
I understand that, but who decides what level of English learner? And you may not be able to answer that. I'm just asking
Okay.
it for a child with disability. Who puts them in that category? Who decides that?
Sure. Okay. So the English language proficiency, I believe that's a standardized level of testing. So a student, I guess it'd be the school would have to test their students, every year to see what proficiency level they are at. With the disability categories, I believe each category has a set of disabilities under it. So category A would say disability X, Y, and Z falls into that category. So it would be, instead of making a determination, you're really just looking, okay, what does the student have? What did they score on the proficiency test for English, or do they have this disability? Does it fall under category A, B, or C? Rather than you just arbitrarily are making that determination as an official in school. Does that answer your question?
It does. It leaves a door wide open to what I don't. That's something I want to find out about is how it's determined, because that's like level one. That's significant in life. So that's like the question was asked earlier. If you had 10 students with level one, does each one of them get level one, even though they're going into the same class and getting taught by the same teacher?
I think the
So,
answer, yeah.
yes, that's currently, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did. I said I asked them.
Yeah, so yes, to answer your question from earlier, yes, each of those students, whether they're in the same classroom, one student in a classroom, if they fall under this category, they would receive this level of funding. Yes, 10, 20, 1, if they are all English level 1, they would receive that. That's
And is there any way we can put guardrails, as we always say, to say as they gain students that level comes down?
I believe that I'll turn to the lawyers for that, but I mean, that's not contained. in
That's always that. You can
73.
do whatever you want. Okay.
Yeah. Act 73 does not speak to that itself.
Yeah. It's later, but that's definitely something like that. There's hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars that.
Well, yeah, we have to explore whether there is an economy of scale that maybe I think the premise is that there's not.
Yeah, so I had,
That's the, but
I was gonna say, I would have answered the question the way that Ezra did, and perhaps I misunderstood I understood you to be asking the question, does the dollar figure that's been chosen or the weight that's been chosen account for this fact in its determination, rather than does each student receive a fixed amount? They do receive a fixed amount. It's a separate question whether the empirics behind the number correctly scale the way that you're identifying.
Yeah, you're. So yes. So a student who falls into the English level, the disability category or under this federal poverty level of 185% or less, a student meeting any of those conditions would receive the weighting amount you see here. A little bit of an outlier is the only grade weight that is still within Act 73 is that pre-K student weight. And you'll see it's actually at negative 0.54, similar to what you have now. That actually reduces the weight. So that 1.0 that every student gets is then essentially matched with that minus 0.54. So their net weight would be 0.46. But unlike as you have currently with taxing capacity, it's now 0.46 of that 15,033 is the dollar amount a pre-K student would receive. Unless, of course, they fall under FPL, then they still get the full 1.02 there. That is not reduced because remember, we're adding our weights under Act 73. So just, yeah, every student would be eligible. Pre-K students could receive that.
One other question on the very first slide, it's base times LTWADM.
Mhm.
And here it just says base per LDN. So there no multiplication here.
So the base amount of 15,033 is per your long-term ADM. So that is just signifying that one student without any weights on their own would receive the 15,033. And also that figure is helpful when you recall the supplemental district spending that John spoke about that is the amount that you can spend your additional percentage over is this 15,033 per long-term ADM, which does not have any weights on it. So if you have just 100 students, it's 15,033 per that long-term ADM of 100 without regard for their weights. So that's why your 15,033 per long-term ADM is helpful versus long-term weighted ADM, because your weighted ADM does not go into consideration with your supplemental district spending. So you start out with your long-term ADM, which is 1.0 for every pupil. And then once you've added in these weights, that's when you reach the long-term weighted ADM, which is multiplied by the 15,033. And just noting down here that under Act 73, small school and sparsity, rather than being weights, they are now grants. And so just moving on to this table here to kind of illustrate that. So Act 73 implements them as support grants, and there are a few criteria here. So for your small school support grant, so that is for a school with fewer than 100 enrolled pupils based on the 2-year average at that school. So that's different from the current year's ADM. You're going to look at your past 2 years actual enrollment, and that would not be affected by the weights. So if you have 100 kids in year 1 and 100 kids in year 2, regardless of their weights, that's still an enrollment of 100 pupils. So we're looking at enrollment for school size, not ADMs. And then also you see that there is a small by necessity. Now that is currently undefined. Act 73 charged the State Board of Education with defining that. And early to mid-December, they released a report in which they effectively shifted that determination to the Agency of Education. If you look here in the notes, I have the small and sparse by necessity now need to be defined by the Agency of Education. And for further details, I've linked it there on that hyperlink for here. So if you go there, you can see the report that the State Board had laid out where they reached their conclusion that they recommend that the agency should make this recommendation. And so the grant amount for small school support would be that $3,157 per pupil at the school that John laid out. And a similar structure for your sparse school support grant. So you have a school in a sparse location, which is defined as a school located in a city, town, or village with a population of fewer than 55 people per square mile of land. And so it has to be located in the village rather than
in a district that is considered sparse, that's something that changed with Act 73 being enacted. The location was changed to a city, town, or village. So even if your district as a whole would not be considered sparse, if the town that the school is located in is in a isolated sparse area, that school itself would still be considered a sparse school regardless of the rest of the district. And vice versa, if you have a very wide sparse district, but you have a town with a school right in the middle of the town, and that's itself is not a sparse area, then that school would not be eligible under Act 73. And then again, you have this by necessity, and here it is sparse by necessity, which is currently undefined as I laid out because the State Board of Education has now moved that over to Agency of Education. And that would be 1,954 per pupil based on the 2-year average enrollment, which is the same figure being used above for that small school enrollment size. So that is different than your long-term weighted ADM. That's just the 2-year average of students actually enrolled at your school without regard to their grades.
Yeah, just curious, going back to your topic that the State Board of Education was tasked to figure out the definition of small by necessity, sparse by necessity, et cetera. And they were going to produce a report, I think it was January 1 or thereabouts, on what these definitions should be, but they punted. They said the AOE should be responsible for this definition.
Yes,
In
so
summary, is correct.
yes, so that's correct. On, I believe it was December 17th, they released a report and they do go through a few different ideas for measures such as miles, land miles,
Yeah.
minutes driving.
Yes.
They lay some of those out in their report. However, at the end of the report, they recommend that the final determination should be made by the Agency of Education. They offer some, I guess, thoughts and considerations about a few different measures, but they don't offer a final ironclad ruling, which I believe is what you just said. So yes.
And then AOE hasn't reacted to that, saying when they could determine this definition of
I've not,
small or sparse.
no, I've not seen that yet.
So I would also note that with the small by necessity and the 100 students, it's just interesting as a committee that visited Canaan for us to think about the fact that, if I remember correctly, they had 127 kids pre-K through high school, and they wouldn't qualify. But small by
Well,
necessity.
when is it the district or school? Because they have an elementary school and they have a high school. You know, separate.
Well, I think I guess that's a fair question because the buildings are separate. but-
Yeah, and they say, once you leave from there, you go to the other one.
But I think they should have, I think they were treated as a single school.
Well, their lunchrooms are separate, aren't they?
No, I don't think so. No,
Got it.
they weren't. So, so I don't know what that means, but I think it's interesting to note that even though they have very few kids per grade, if it were just a high school, they would clearly qualify. I say, but they would qualify for at least 100 students, wouldn't be under 100 students, but because they have in effectively one building, pre-K through 12, 127 kids, they don't. And I just want to note that may or may not make sense. And they should think about that.
I thought they had a total of 360 kids.
I could be wrong,
Okay.
but I think.
That's what concerned me as well in the summer.
Okay, so if you're right, it's not an issue. If I'm right, it's we're not an issue. Yeah, your number is better than mine, maybe.
Yeah, so like I said, it's pretty brief. So just want to end with some considerations. So I think these tables may be helpful for you when you're thinking about just kind of fast facts, want to find a number, but these tables do not include supplemental district spending or categorical A. You heard a little bit about what was being repealed and what was being enacted from John around supplemental district spending is being enacted, but some of your grants, such as your EL grant, would therefore be repealed and replaced with this tiered weight. And there's also outstanding questions that, were not laid out. So CTE, there's a weight for CTE. Pre-K, it has a weight, but if you recall, that's the same weight as is currently operating under and is from the previous system. That weight itself was not derived from the Colby and Baker memo, so that is effectively a holdover weight. And then also potential school district redistricting that will have an impact on your small schools if students are being moved between schools. Also anything about sparse schools and just what effects that may have on cost around the state.
And also the high school placement. Because right now, the level of tuition is costs about 12% more to educate a high school kid, but there's no way at this point until we go through that.
Yes, correct. There is no grade weight for high school or middle school students. Currently, 6 through 8 middle school students have a weight for taxing capacity, same for 9 through 12 students, correct? You don't see that here, so.
But there's a report coming at the end of this year.
Yes, yeah.
Yes, but yes, that's a great consideration. That's outstanding. Any further questions? Yes.
So I get it that this is an education committee, not a finance committee, but we had a lot of pop-ups last spring that came out of the finance committee. So I'm curious from JFO's perspective, the homestead property tax exemption with this change on values and percentages and et cetera. Is there an anticipated revenue loss to the state based on that part of the legislation?
Switching from a property tax credit to a homestead exemption. I believe that the testimony given last year is that it was estimated to cost approximately 35 million.
It's 35 million.
However, that from last session, I'm sure my colleague Julia Richter would be able to adjust things now that we're a year later. So those numbers are a little older, but I believe.
Okay, could you just ask her to at some point validate that 35 million is still accurate? Because my sense is the first lever we're going to pull is we created this second home property tax unique rate, and that's automatically going to impact. I imagine it's automatically going to impact the second homeowner tax rate, like 35 million right off the bat, let alone any other changes. So I'm curious if the 35 million is still an accurate or semi-accurate figure.
I'll look into that for you.
Thank you.
Any further questions?
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all.
150 students.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, so K.
Wait, that is. So, by the way, you're gonna get a lot of paper. And a lot of it you're gonna want to use several times. If you want to, if I write about this, you can put your name on it and keep it here with Daphne, and then we're getting it again, like your copy of Acts of the Free, John's slides. If you don't want it, because we're gonna want them now and then. So put your name on them. And tomorrow we're doing the remind me that we're doing that.
Yes,
With like we're doing the school production.
yeah, we have invited out, so we first,
And we have the report.
yeah.
And we have the report, so people can take it tonight if they want to, or just maybe go through it tomorrow.
And which one's that?
It is the, what's it called, the title?
State aid for school construction.
You don't know. It's here.
Okay, and it's,
Okay. Look at them, like, or you can just wait to get pick it up tomorrow. Tomorrow, will probably be good.
Do you need me? I heard I'm needed. Okay.
Oh, no,
Okay.
well, not today. Thank you,
We're
Julia.
just talking about
Yeah,
that.
hey, wait a minute.
So, we have a few minutes, if you want, we want to take a few minutes, we can go around and, like I said, I think with this, we didn't get enough recommendations. So we're gonna have to figure out for the committee, how we want to proceed. And my thinking for the short one had been, just to take some testimony, like, you know, in the task force report, hear from the Bs, hear from superintendents later, now both reactions and reporters, what they see that would be helpful, and let our thinking emerge a little bit on how we want to approach that. But you know, that's, and I've got, you know, we'll have some other testimony from like the nonprofits and things like that in last year, some of the work to do like in this arena work that relates to the budget letter, and we can fill with views and that kind of thing. But this is our major task, I think, for the year. So unless people have well, anyway, so people, that's sort of was my approach to, and by the way, I'm meeting with, I think Peter Quallen just stuck his head in here, where we are talking about the way that we can do more, some joint hearings, just for the efficiency of taking in the same information. And we're starting now on Thursday at 1. We'll speak to the task force report. And we're going to talk a bit more about other topics which we can take to related to this. But I think we both noted that the committee discussion tends to be better committee by committee, but taking the testimony and taking it in like makes sense. Putting some of that together. That will make sense. But anybody want to go?
Are you thoughts? So I agree with everything you said. Are you also asking for other priorities for the session in addition to reaction to Act 73?
Yeah, if you've got non-Act 73 things you'd like us to take up, yeah, that's something we should talk about.
Okay, so I heard in my morning committee that committee bills can be framed prior to the end of January, which is it's new this year. And I think that that gives us only 3 weeks. So may take some time to kind of fashion at least an outline for what a potential committee bill might entail, in addition to whatever comes up on the wall.
Yeah, and we may also get I know the agency has a couple of things outside of Act 73 that they want us to consider that year. I've actually forgotten what they are. If they'll be able to talk about those.
I think a relevant topic, but not specifically related to I-73, is CTE expansion.
Yeah.
Okay. Second is ETSU strategic vision. These campuses, satellite campuses, where are they going? What are we going to do with them? Or is it status quo? I'm really curious. We've asked now 3 years, 4th year now. What is that strategic plan? And we have not gotten the good.
And that was for the Vermont campuses.
Yeah, the 4 Vermont ETSU. I think
To include how many students in there.
I'm more interested in what are you going to do with facilities versus the students that you've got versus the view for the future. I just think we're at the point now where, I think we're doing excellent with that perception. Sure,
We can't do anything, we can't do anything until we agree to do it. And we all the plans.
Sure. So in terms of Act 73, it's all heard something, but generally speaking, you know, I want to make sure that whatever we're doing, whatever direction we take is guided by evidence and, you know, information from experts who have an in-depth understanding of what they're talking about. I know it can be easy. I mean, I'm sure we've all done it to some extent where, you know, we have a position at the very beginning, you know, whether it's a year ago when we first started this process or 2 or 3 years ago. But with more information that comes to light or evidence that we don't get, you know, it's So if you need to change your mind or to develop a new position, a new policy. And yeah, so I just want to make sure that we're evidence focused. That's at least that's going to be my priority. And also keeping in mind that, you know, with each discussion that we have, I mean, we all know for sure that teachers, staff, and parents really watch us like a hawk, as they should. And every conversation that we have, you know, that, you know, whether we're talking about hypotheticals or policy proposals, that has a pretty big impact on, you know,
Reaction.
yeah, it has a big reaction. It leaves people wondering, you know, if they're going to have a job in a year, or if their kids are going to have to go to a different school. And, you know, on the flip side of that, I get that it's challenging, because then how do we have policy conversations about potential policy changes? So, but it's just something to keep in mind that I'm going to be keeping in mind as well.
I think the shifting sands argument you're making is well taken. It's something we have to. And I had a superintendent say to me, just like shifting sands for money.
Yeah, it can cause a lot of anxiety. Outside of Act 73, just echo what Senator Reed said, CTEs is the other thing that's big on my mind, and trying to expand how students can job shadow or apprentice at different places that, you know, meet a certain standard that can provide on the job training that may not necessarily be in a CTE facility. And I think that could help alleviate some of the challenges of transportation to a CTE facility. You know, if you have a good mechanic shop in town that you know meets a certain set of standards to, you know, allow students there for part of the day, I think that would be a great way. Great way to get kids to reduce certain grades. That's what they want to do.
As it turns out, the agency had thought about that, and like said that would start the discussion. Let's throw it out this way for a minute.
District boundaries. I mean, what are we gonna do?
Well,
I'm gonna pick one, you know, and to his point, you know, this is such a complex plan, it really is. So many moving parts to it. There's a lot of misinformation out there. People that thought they knew, and now all of a sudden they don't, to include myself in some issues. So, yeah, need to make sure that we talk, you know, what we're talking.
so are you asking the question?
Yes.
About maps in general?
Yes.
Or are we gonna,
Yeah,
what are we gonna do with maps or?
because we don't have, we do.
Can I ask,
Senator Hepburn, oh, go ahead.
can I just ask for clarification, like maps that save money?
District boundary.
Right. What do you want the maps to achieve?
So we need a plan, we need a map to start, to put the plan together.
Because what we got out on when we were at schools is that just what Senator Sabine was saying is that people want data, and we cannot give any data. If we had 3 maps, say one with 2 districts, one with 5, one with 20, there's something we can go and get data on each, so we know how we can compare. As of right now, nobody wants to make a decision to say, you know, out of these 3 maps, here's what works best in certain different scenarios. We have none of that. So that's what I'd like to achieve too. After these 5, I'm gonna be bold and say 2 districts right down through the center of it, and then local control is how we figure out to give it to advisory boards for the school, so they still have some local control. But that's a bold plan on my side, but state is not big enough to have the districts we have, and I think all Vermonters realize that. It's just the changes that are coming that we're all having the hard time of. If my small school has to close, what am I gonna do? Because it is gonna be, you know, Hancock and Rochester have spoken to me that it did change their dynamics in their community, and that's a concern. Is it a big concern how much money we spend? that's the decision we have to make. And it's a hard one, but I hope our two, education committees can come to a decision and start putting some rubber to the road to get people evidence that this will or won't save us money. This is a good idea or isn't it? Right now, we're still scrambling. Way to go. The co-op that the task force put out. So that's a decent idea. Why didn't we think of that years ago? Kind of wondered, but
You mean, BOCES.
no, well, co-op sharing of resources, some type of co-op. But if you cut it down to one district and there's advisory boards and that, then you don't have that worry. But that's just my thought. But that's what I'm thinking.
So the question I was asking around the room is just, things you would like to, each individually like to see the committee take up, or priorities of whether they have to do with Act 73 and or continue there, or whether it's outside of the scope of Act 73. So, and we heard state colleges, strategic plan, CTEs, and Senator Hashim's major point, I think, was election, whatever doing this evidence based. And I just talked about the way that we're going to have to, by the way, so we're trying to work more closely with the House committee in some instances, taking shared testimony, and sort of organically letting the committee gel a little bit around the direction that's ready to take, because I'm not sure what that direction is. So, but anyway, so it's your turn if you want to.
No, just
You're
one
last.
more thing about the district boundaries. That, I think, we're still in the conceptual phase of this. As we go into and come up with a decision on boundaries, we start working through it. We're gonna find out. It's gonna be pretty obvious what's gonna work in this. And I think that it's gonna have to be flexible enough so that we can make changes as we go through this process, 4 years. But we need to start someplace.
And so I think, I want to spend this session reminding ourselves of the problems we're trying to solve. And I use VHI as an example, right? I have been here through changing the commissioner to a secretary and deciding that a statewide healthcare contract for teachers would save us all kinds of money and headache and time. And if we don't evaluate if those things actually saved us any money, or made our system better, it's irresponsible of us, right? So I think looking at healthcare as a major cost driver, and that did not, the rate of growth probably accelerated. I mean, it did across the board, but we did not get any value in oversight or efficiency out of one healthcare negotiation. We're going to be asked to take a look at that. But I think we have to look at everything through the lens of, are we saving money? Are we increasing educational quality or workforce retention and recruitment? And I think there's a lot of things we could do that just feel like we're doing something that could cause harm. And I think we need to look back at some of the things we've done where we were wrong, or we caused more harm than we have taken on board. So I do think the task force did a good job identifying the real cost drivers here, and that there are elements of consolidation that could exacerbate those cost drivers. If we combine districts where salaries are very high, you're going to get higher salaries. If we have a regional transportation, but not a statewide transportation system, you might actually increase the miles traveled and the cost of transportation. So I just want to make sure we're continuing to return to what problems our Vermont constituents asked us to solve. And I think the votes we've seen go down more consistently have to do with, should we be building a new world-class high school, or should we limp along with what we have? Not every current district should be reimagining its high school. But they also can't do the important work of building world-class regional high schools without us. So I'd like to look much more deeply at school construction, and particularly what I think Vermonters are asking us to do regionally, which is create excellent high schools that, in my mind, are either comprehensive CTEs or let those kids go to a different CTE community. So that I have in my hot little hands, my CTE bill, which I've been working on with a lot of CTE stakeholders over the last 6 months. So that's a bit of a tangent, but really the only way we're going to increase quality and create districts, I think, that are bigger but functional is by starting with, where should we be building high schools, and what do those high schools need to include to be world class? In my mind, the American dream is being able to take your child to elementary school, to walk them there, to bike them there, to
That's it.
take them in the car.
Because I had students, that we lived out in the country. We were 3 miles away. When we were old enough, we pedaled in.
But you knew you were safe getting to school.
Yeah, we thought we were. We had, the troubles were then as they are now, just more relevant now. But I have another constituent that she lived in Ferrisburg, and it was an hour and a half bus ride to get to the elementary school, going by 2 other elementary schools.
Well, I think,
But-
if I could condense this, I think what you're saying is more community at the elementary school level, and then progressively larger for middle and high school.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
More regional.
Which I can get behind.
Yes. So I'll stop waxing poetic. In addition, I think special education is an area where we have not understood where we've helped or hurt. And there is a lot of good work that came before us that has not been implemented in some of these areas, like special education. And we're scaring a lot of families and kids and parents and teachers, and we can only do that if we're really making sure that we understand what's come before us and what we need to implement to get some of these things right.
So how do you suggest we get at that?
I asked a group of special education experts and leaders and parents to do something similar to what I did with CTE. Because frankly, AOE, I'm going to say it out loud because I already put it in an op-ed or something, but I mean, AOE was barely at the table with CTE. When they did their educational quality standards work, CTE was not included. Then they came to our group and said their big idea is to have one CTE district that's managed separately by the state and a new state board, which doesn't solve any problems as far as I'm concerned. I don't see a single problem that solves that we've been asked to solve. That means those CTE centers have to relate to their existing district, which that has been where a lot of the breakdown happens, but also answer to a new, probably expensive or time-consuming entity at the state level without addressing the duplication and confusion that would create. So similarly, I don't think AOE has been the authority they need to be to come in and tell us what we need to do on special education. I've asked a separate group of people to do that work. AOE has gone through many, many special education directors, and the most recent one resigned. And I think we need to take a good hard look at where we need to help create systems change with the tools we've already tried to provide schools. And I don't see any value, frankly, in just saying, giving AOE more to do. I don't think that's helping our schools right now.
Especially on the list.
I'm gonna ask him for this all summer, just to get our heads together and brainstorm where we go from here. I'm not qualified to work on healthcare. It's a driver. I don't dispute that, but we're not gonna fix it. The other thing is we gotta get out in front of the declining, population. Right now we're dealing with 80,000 students. At the end of 4 years of this transition, we may have 70,000. And once we know, we either can stop the hemorrhaging and know what we got at the end of the cycle, how can we come up with a plan to fix it?
I mean, what makes me really, what I really keeps me up at night thinking about kids is that there are wait lists for CTE. That students who are probably languishing and not succeeding and maybe not graduating
I'm with you.
in their schools
Yeah, I think we all.
We agree.
are, so we're losing kids. Like, of the precious few kids we have, there are some that are on wait lists or being told you're not good enough for the program that would make you come alive. It is an economic development question too. I do want to say, like, we do have to talk about this in economic development. Maybe we didn't have a joint hearing.
I'm gonna agree with all of my colleagues here, but we heard clearly that healthcare is one of the prime drivers of cost escalation in education. I would like to recommend a joint testimony with the healthcare health and welfare people on how this is being addressed so that we share this burden, not just point fingers at where the cost escalations are coming from and how it impacts something as straightforward as education benefits, costs, i.e. healthcare for teachers. I think we need to have an open conversation about what has caused healthcare cost escalation and what can we do about it? What can we realistically do? I think that's a.
Yeah, I think if you wanted to, you could just perhaps have them share the healthcare commission and just talk about some of the minus some things last year, some things looking at this year. I think there is a proposal from the Superintendent's Association that we'll hear about. We actually heard about it last year as well, but we'll hear about it again about a way to reduce the costs. So we'll take that testimony as well. Some of what you're talking about is global, and some of it is what this committee can actually how we interface with that. Good. Yeah. Agree. Yeah. Yeah.
So somebody at the leadership level needs to decide who's going to do that. Because we're not qualified, I don't think, to deal with it. And we should be forging ahead to the transformation plan.
Yeah, we also have to keep our eye on the but all these pieces are relevant.
Well, hypothetically, we're not, but there are bills on the table now which cap education spending, but at the same time, we know that healthcare costs continue to escalate. So we have to have an open conversation about what's driving that, at least for our own awareness, before we ever talk about some bill that caps costs, which caps healthcare insurance costs for future. We can't pull a lever not knowing, well, okay, so we've artificially capped healthcare costs. And then the net effect is it affects programs, academic programs. We just can't be making those decisions without understanding
The consequences.
and why we're in this situation.
The reason that I left Senate Finance to come to Senate Education is because cost containment and tax policy is different than addressing cost drivers and education policy. And I think the pressure of what Senate Finance has been asked to do is too great a weight to bear with a very blunt instrument. A cap is a very blunt instrument. It is made much more surgical when the policy committees are doing their work to figure out how we are not setting our districts up to fail by asking them to simply have their costs.
The last recommendation I would have is I'd like we heard last year some testimony about, the potential, cost benefits of going towards, smaller districts. I'd like to have JFO in standby to validate AOE's spreadsheets that were offered last spring with that specific topic. Because we heard in the school groups and also from our constituents that there was no validation of that there's any cost savings to reducing district numbers. And I heard just the opposite. So just so it's not coming out of AOE's mouth, but being validated by JFO, I think that's an important step somewhere over the next 2 months or so.
So you're saying test the assumption.
Yep,
that
test it.
that we presented.
Yeah, pick
On
a scenario.
district size,
Yeah, one of the district,
Pick a scenario on number of districts. Gen up the labor and facilities spreadsheet
Mhm.
costs. Have JFO validate. So that we're all like, okay, hey, they're right, or they're wrong, or they're off by, X percent. Just so we can all walk away with, at least we knew, line item by line item, like person by person, what that net cost is, what that delta, that difference in cost is.
I mean, I was looking for Jay, who must have just walked out and
Okay.
wasn't paying attention, because any of the informal conversations I had about the difference in, I'm an evidence-based formula or cost regression, I don't know. But the AOE presentation left a lot of critical education staff out. I remember hearing that. I don't want to put words in JFO's mouth, but they did not have the time or capacity to validate what
Okay.
AOE has put forward, because AOE had assumed, had not given a comprehensive look at what staff you need to run a school district. There was a lot missing that even the naked eye.
Okay, so we're gonna need something, some type of analysis to that effect over the next 2 months.
Mhm.
Here's on day one of the session, JFO, AOE, let's have this conversation to validate whether it is or isn't. Let's just put them on notice that we're gonna need that support during this session. Or my colleague's point, it's not evidence-based. It's an opinion, a single opinion as opposed to a validated data set. And, I just think we need to say, we understand the cost impact, the cost benefit, or not having a cost benefit during this process.
And we used to have somebody in here today, we have them now. Anybody here, every one of our meetings for the last 3 years, somebody was here. We had a question, we pointed to them and said, get us the information. Who can we get to come in and testify to that fact? We don't have them.
Okay, that's been helpful. Some thinking, and tomorrow we're here 10 minutes after the others are us, and for a relatively brief on some instruction.
I have some leadership duties after the district.
We're just going to what year? And then Thursday. So, by the way, again, to remind you, you can keep these reports with Daphne, and then they'll pull them back out.
Oh,
Want them. Put your name on them, on anything you want to make with her, so that it's.
Let me know when I can schedule a CTE hearing.
Yeah, we need to put some time on CTs because it's
I had a pretty comprehensive work group
relevant.
all
Yeah,
the last 6 months.
so you would like the afternoon?
I would like an afternoon.
Okay.
Oh my God.
I don't know if this is my fault. I honestly don't understand this latest round of drafting with Lich Council. I have a paper copy of my CTE proposal. And I can submit it with very few co-sponsors. But I'm happy to give people the opportunity to look at it. I don't know. Who do I need to ask Beth if she can send me the latest digital feedback, because I don't have one that went through editing. So here's a paper copy.
Okay, we are